Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about something that feels, for many of us, like a huge, impossible mountain we are supposed to climb. We are talking about housing. Specifically, we're talking about why it feels like you need to win the lottery or discover a secret pirate treasure just to afford a place to live. Housing affordability isn't just a buzzword you hear on the news. It's a real, tangible thing that affects where you sleep, where your kids go to school, and how much money you have left over for, everything else. It's about the fundamental human need for shelter and whether our society is set up to provide that for everyone. So, what does housing affordability actually mean? In the simplest terms, it means you can pay for your home without it completely wrecking your budget. It means that after you've paid your rent or your mortgage, you still have enough money for groceries, utilities, for your car, for a doctor's visit, when the need arises, and maybe even for a pizza on Friday night. It's not about everyone owning a mansion. It's about having a safe, stable place to live that doesn't force you to sacrifice other essential needs. Think of it like a seesaw. On one side, you have your income. On the other, you have your housing costs. Affordability is when that seesaw is balanced, not when one side is stuck way up in the air. Let's imagine two people. First, there's Grace, a teacher who lives in a small city. Her rent takes up about a quarter of her monthly paycheck. She can afford her bills, save a little bit, and doesn't stress every time the first of the month rolls around. For Grace, her housing is affordable. Now let's consider Patrick, a graphic designer in a major metropolitan area. His rent for a tiny apartment eats up more than half his income. He's constantly worried, often has to choose between paying for a car repair or a utility bill, and saving money feels like a fantasy. For Patrick, his housing is unaffordable, and this single cost creates a cascade of problems in his life. This isn't some abstract economic theory, it is the lived reality for millions of people. The struggle is real, and it shows up in countless ways. It's the recent college graduate who has to move back in with their parents. It's the young family that can't move out of a one-bedroom apartment even after having a second child. It's the essential worker who has to commute 2 hours each way because they can't afford to live in the city where they work. Understanding housing affordability is the first step toward understanding one of the biggest social and economic challenges of our time. A challenge that defines the landscape of our lives in 2024. Okay, so we know what affordability is, and we have a rule of thumb to measure it. But what are the actual ingredients that go into this complicated recipe? What are the forces that push housing prices up or pull them down? It's not just one thing. It's a complex interplay of several key factors. To really get it, we need to look at what I like to call the Big Five of housing affordability. These are the 5 core elements that determine whether you can find a home that fits your budget, or whether you're stuck scrolling through listings that make you want to cry. These factors are income, housing costs, interest rates, housing supply, and the local economy. The first two are the most obvious ones, the two sides of our seesaw we talked about earlier, your income and the actual cost of the house or apartment. Your income is what you have to work with, your salary, your wages, any money you have coming in. The housing cost is the price tag on the property, whether it's the monthly rent or the final sale price of a home. The relationship between these two is the absolute foundation of affordability. If incomes in a city are high and housing costs are low, congratulations, you've found a housing paradise. But if incomes are stagnant and housing costs are skyrocketing, you've got a crisis. Let's dive deeper into the most fundamental part of the housing affordability equation, the epic battle between your paycheck and the price tag on the door. First, let's talk about income. For decades after World War II, in many developed countries, wages grew alongside economic productivity. This meant that as the country got richer, so did its workers, and people could generally expect their financial situation to improve over time. A person could reasonably expect to afford a modest home on a single middle-class income. This predictable growth in wages was a cornerstone of the social contract and a key driver of generational wealth building through homeownership. But in recent decades, that link has become frayed, if not completely broken. We've entered a period of wage stagnation. This means that for a huge portion of the population, wages have not kept up with inflation or the rising cost of living. Even if you get a small raise, the price of everything else, gas, groceries, and especially housing, is rising much faster. So, in real terms, you might actually be getting poorer. Your paycheck might have a bigger number on it than your parents did, but its purchasing power, its ability to actually buy things in the world, has shrunk dramatically. This is a massive headwind in the quest for affordable housing. Now, let's look at the other side of the ledger: housing costs. While wages have been crawling, housing prices have been strapped to a rocket. In many desirable cities and even in their surrounding suburbs, home prices have exploded over the past 2 decades. What might have been an affordable starter home in 2004 is now a luxury item. Data from countless sources shows this widening gap. For example, in the United States, the median home price in the 1980s was about 3 times the median household income. Today, that ratio is closer to 7 or 8 times in many places, and much higher in hot markets like San Francisco or Vancouver. This isn't just about mansions and luxury condos. The price of everything has gone up, from single-family homes to townhouses to apartments. Rent has followed a similar brutal upward trajectory. This creates a trap. High rent makes it impossible to save for a down payment, and the high price of homes makes getting a mortgage unattainable. So you're stuck renting, and your rent keeps increasing, further diminishing your ability to save. It's a vicious cycle fueled by the growing chasm between what we earn and what it costs to simply have a place to call home. This fundamental imbalance is the core driver of the affordability crisis. Moving on from income and price, let's unpack the next 2 crucial factors: interest rates and the housing supply. These are the invisible forces that can either open the door to homeownership or slam it shut in your face. First, interest rates. When you buy a home, most people get a mortgage. An interest rate is essentially the fee you pay to the bank for lending you a huge sum of money. Even a tiny change in this rate can have a massive impact on your monthly payment and the total cost of your home over 30 years. For example, a $400,000 mortgage at a 3% interest rate has a monthly principal and interest payment of about $1,686. At 7%, that same mortgage costs $2,661 a month. For a long time, especially after the 2008 financial crisis, we lived in an era of historically low interest rates. This made borrowing money very cheap and helped to keep mortgage payments relatively manageable, even as home prices began to climb. It was a bit of a balancing act. Rising prices were offset by cheaper borrowing costs. However, in the last couple of years, as central banks around the world have raised interest rates to combat inflation, that era has come to a screeching halt. Suddenly, borrowing money is much more expensive. This has delivered a brutal 1-2 punch to potential homebuyers. They now face both record-high home prices and punishingly high interest rates. Now, let's talk about the supply squeeze. This is a classic case of supply and demand. When there aren't enough homes for everyone who wants one, prices go up. It's that simple. And right now, we are living through a severe housing shortage in America. Why? There are several reasons. For one, construction of new homes slowed dramatically after the 2008 housing crash. Builders went out of business, and the industry became much more cautious. We have been underbuilding for over a decade, and we are now feeling the consequences of that shortfall. Furthermore, building new homes is complicated and expensive. Zoning laws in many cities make it difficult to build denser housing like apartments or townhouses, often favoring single-family homes. The cost of land, materials like lumber and concrete, and skilled labor have all skyrocketed. So, when you put all these factors together, you get the perfect storm that is the current housing market. It's not just one single problem, but a convergence of multiple challenges, all hitting at the same time, creating an environment that is uniquely difficult for renters and aspiring homeowners. The first and most visible challenge is the relentless rise in housing costs. Prices didn't just climb, they soared to historic heights, fueled by low interest rates and a pandemic-era scramble for more space. So you have a quadruple whammy: sky-high prices, not enough homes to go around, ferocious competition for what's available, and paychecks that aren't growing fast enough. This is the reality of the current housing market, and it explains why so many people feel like the dream of a stable home is slipping further and further away. Alright, this has been pretty bleak, But it's not totally hopeless. Recognizing the scale of a problem is the first step to solving it. And there are solutions. There are concrete steps that communities, governments, and individuals can take to make housing more affordable. It won't be easy or quick, but it is possible. The most direct and widely supported solution is to address the supply crisis head-on. We need to build more homes, a lot more homes, of all shapes and sizes, at all price points. More supply helps to ease the competition and stabilize prices over the long term. How do we do that? A big part of the answer lies in policy changes at the local and state level. This includes reforming zoning laws to allow for more density. Instead of exclusively zoning vast areas for single-family homes, cities can permit duplexes, townhouses, and small to mid-size apartment buildings in more neighborhoods. This not only increases the number of available homes, but also creates more diverse and vibrant communities. We also need to streamline the approval process for new construction projects. It can sometimes take years and mountains of paperwork to get a new building approved, which adds significant costs and delays that ultimately get passed on to the renter or buyer. Beyond just building more market-rate housing, we must also invest in dedicated affordable housing programs. This means public funding for housing projects that are reserved for low- and middle-income families, ensuring that they are not priced out of their own communities. Nonprofit housing developers and community land trusts are fantastic models for this. A community land trust, for example, is a nonprofit that owns land and then sells or rents the homes on that land at affordable rates, keeping them permanently affordable for future generations by separating the cost of the house from the escalating cost of the land it sits on. And we can't forget about renters. With homeownership out of reach for so many, we need to strengthen protections and support for the growing number of people who rent. This can include programs for rental assistance or housing vouchers to help low-income families bridge the gap between their income and the market rent. We can also explore innovative housing models, like co-living spaces, accessory dwelling units, also known as granny flats or backyard cottages, and modular or 3D printed homes that can be built more quickly and cheaply. And finally, on the other side of the seesaw, we need policies that promote higher wages and better jobs, because a fair wage is the foundation of a stable life. The question of who can afford a home in our society is not just an economic question, it is a moral one. It's about what kind of world we want to live in. Do we want vibrant, diverse communities where teachers, firefighters, artists, and baristas can live alongside doctors and lawyers? Or do we want cities that are hollowed out, where only the wealthiest can afford to live, and everyone else is pushed to the margins, facing long commutes and financial instability? A healthy society needs affordable housing for everyone. It is the bedrock upon which we build stable lives, strong families, and thriving local economies. This is a challenge that requires action on all levels. We need our federal and state governments to make major investments in housing and support policies that lead to higher wages. We need our city and town councils to be brave, to reform outdated zoning laws and welcome new neighbors and new types of homes into their communities. We need developers to embrace innovative and cost-effective building methods. And we, as individuals, have a role to play. We can show up to town hall meetings, vote for candidates who prioritize housing, and support affordable housing developments in our own neighborhoods. Ultimately, making housing fair and affordable for everyone is a collective project. It requires empathy, courage, and a shared understanding that a safe and stable home is not a commodity. It is a fundamental human right. It is the foundation for health, for opportunity, and for dignity. The path to solving this crisis will be long and challenging, but it is a journey we must embark on together. Because the real reason you can't afford a home isn't just about economics, it's about the kind of community we choose to be. Up next, we examine why housing is unaffordable. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and share this video.